For starting late. We had a technical problem that we had rehearsed a million times, and it chose to come up at this moment, so it's being tricky with us. Thank you for coming. أهلا وسهلا بالجميع. This is our Customer Satisfaction Index Awards event for 2024, which marks 15 years since we started running the index. For me personally, it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. It's been years that some of the brands that are here today we see frequently enough that we know that they are the leaders in customer satisfaction. And it's also wonderful to see some new faces for new brands that have started in entering the index in terms of competitive position. Tonight's agenda, I think you have received an email, but I'll just give you a quick overview of what we're going to do tonight. I'll be sharing some of the insights that we have obtained for the past 15 years based on thousands and thousands of records. And after that, we'll have a panel that I'm really excited to have from Bubian Bank, NBK, Full Story, and Service Hero. And then following that, the moment that everyone's waiting for, the awards. So before we begin, I'd like to just share in a video highlights of the 2024 findings from the index. So Steve Jobs is famous for many things, but there's one quote for him that in particular we like when he talks about people who are crazy because they think they can change the world, and they actually do change the world. Now, we do want to change something, and the something that we do want to change is customer behavior and also corporate behavior. So there's two cultural changes that we're trying to do. They're both very difficult. In 2010, when we started the index, there was no such thing as an online review platform where people could go and leave reviews about brands. It just didn't exist in Kuwait or the Middle East. It was the early days of Google reviews. It was also the early days of TripAdvisor, the closest kind of equivalent to what we do, although it's more focused on some industries. So to get people to register on a platform and spend 2 minutes to leave a review was not easy to do, and for them to trust that that feedback would then be relayed to brands. The other challenge that we had was getting brands to listen, because brands thought that they were collecting all the data that they needed, and who were we to tell them that their scores were not as high as they thought they were? So both of those are very, very challenging propositions, and it helps to be a little bit crazy, I think, in pushing the envelope in terms of what we do. So we did have skeptics, and one of the skeptic questions was, why does your feedback matter? And the other question, or the comment that we used to hear a lot was, that people who were angry would be the ones that leave reviews. That makes sense, right? It's normal to consider that somebody who has something to say about a brand will be the one to leave the negative review about the brand. And it was our theory as well. We were afraid that we would see a bell curve where most of the feedback was the ones and the twos. What we saw, though, was different. We saw people who also left very powerful, positive reviews. And I'm going to pronounce this wrong because all the younger generation says this about me. I say emojis. I don't know if it's emojis or emojis, but we'd see hearts, thumbs up, smiley faces, and things like that to do with brands. So what we've learned is that both voices matter. The positive fuels you. The negative helps you to improve and innovate. And the challenge is for brands to listen to both sides of the story, not just the positive. Let me talk to you about data collection. So because we're essentially a market research company, from the very beginning, what we wanted to do was to collect feedback that was verified. In the beginning, we would manually review the full data set that we would collect. Now it's fully automated. Actually, it's 98% automated to be very accurate. So we have an algorithm that looks at all the data. We've collected 350,000 reviews across the years. These reviews are from consumers, again, who have left a lot of information about themselves, their demographic information, the brands that they deal with, a response to around to 18 questions that we ask them, as well as open reviews. However, we don't take all this feedback at face value. What our job is to authenticate and verify the reviews. And again, we do that either manually in the beginning, and now, as I said, the algorithm looks at so many different elements and dimensions that it's so accurate. We're really happy with the fact that we only validate, on average, 80% of the reviews that we collect. That means we remove 20% of the sample every single year. Last year, we removed 25% of the sample because brands were competing to raise their star rating. So we have to really be very careful about what data to keep and what data to remove. So we have around 280,000 validated reviews across the years. Let me show you the trend line in terms of collecting reviews. When we started, we were collecting the first 5 years under 10,000 reviews. The 5 years that followed that, we went up to the threshold of around 18,000 reviews. The years after that, we were around 24,000, 25,000. Last year was a milestone for us with 29,000 reviews. What does that say? It says that consumers more and more are comfortable with the idea of leaving a rating on a platform, an independent platform such as Service Hero. So for us, it's really rewarding to see that the culture of consumers leaving ratings has improved dramatically since we started. So what does the data tell us? We have a lot of information. As I said, we have information on 16 data points, which are the service dimensions that we measure. We have data on the demographic profile of the users who leave a review. We have data on which brands they deal with. We have data on their satisfaction, of course. So what does that tell us? There's a lot of information. What we have seen is a very powerful story, and the story is that Kuwait has improved by 9% in customer satisfaction across the 15 years. 9% is huge when you're looking at a national scale. We're not looking at an independent brand. We're looking at 850 brands across 18 business categories that we're measuring. So 9% means that we're having a transformation when it comes to service excellence standards. And in fact, this transformation is across the board, across all the industries that we are tracking data for. So you'll see in this chart here, we have data for 18 categories. Not one of them declined in customer satisfaction in the 15 years. The only one that shows a 0 is cafes. Technically, it's 0.2%. So that's one industry that hardly moved, but it's also the highest category in our index. All the other categories have improved. The ones in green are transformative industries. Car service, a huge difference in the way car service was in 2010 to how it is today, 16% improvement, that's huge. We have a huge improvement for airlines, mobile operators, fast food, electronics, and then the two banking categories, because they're very robust and very small. What this suggests is a very healthy economy in Kuwait, where the private sector does take customer experience very seriously. We'd like to see more improvement in some of the lower categories, in particular healthcare, that only improved 2% since we started in 2010. When we look at the data in terms of a trend line nationally, so we're looking here at where we were and where we are, we started customer satisfaction in the beginning at 72.6, and as you can see, it's generally an upward trend line until we ended the last 2 years at 78.9. That's the highest we've ever hit. It's 1% higher than the American Customer Satisfaction Index. And again, it's an indicator that the private sector in Kuwait is very robust, very mature in terms of service excellence. We don't think that it's going to improve beyond that. And you'll notice there was 1 year, which is the COVID year, when service standards plummeted in Kuwait. But look at the rebound. A 6-point rebound between the COVID year and the year after is remarkable. And I think COVID was transformative, again using the word transformative, but it was a transformative event because brands realized that without their consumers, they're not going to survive. And I think it made it very real to them, the need to serve customers in a way that earned their loyalty. So we have come up to help brands understand what does the score mean. We've come up with a 5-service level legend. And the legend says if there's a score in the 50s or below, it's unheroic service. Unheroic means that the brand is not even meeting the bare requirements of a consumer. So the consumer has requirements, the brand is failing that. An example would be I want to fly on an airplane, the flight got canceled, there was no replacement flight, right? That's unheroic service. Bland service is in the 60s, and that means that the bare minimum was reached, so my flight got canceled or postponed, and I eventually got where I wanted, but it was hours later, and maybe my luggage got lost, but it eventually arrived. That would be in the 60s. And then we have ordinary service, which means it was meeting customer expectations, but not really pleasing them. Then we have in the 80s, good service. So let's keep our eye on the 80, because today we're going to be rewarding in particular any brand that's above an 80, and that's service that the customer desires. And the highest level is heroic service in the 90s, where it's exceeding customer expectations. So customers have an expectation, it's being met, that would be in the 80s, but if it's exceeded, it'd be in the 90s. So where do you think most brands in Kuwait fall? They fall in the middle. So they fall in the ordinary bucket, which makes sense. It's the average, right? That means that brands are able to serve their customers, but they're not necessarily pleasing them or going above and beyond. However, I'm really happy with this statistic where we have 27% of the sample now scoring good. This was a much lower score when we started in the first few years. Now we have more in the good score. And we have a very symmetric bell curve. We have 2% unheroic, 1% heroic. There's 1 or 2 heroic brands in our index. This is based on an average score for 15 years. So this means the brand has to obtain a score in the 90s for the 15 years on average. Very, very rare to do that. So now that we've looked at that, we would like to share with you 2 golden nuggets of insights. We have so many lessons that we've learned from running the index across the years. Lessons to do with what's important, what do customers prefer, what do they not like, etc. But there's the 2 that we think stand out. That's why we're calling them the golden nuggets. The first of the golden nuggets is the idea of the correlation between expectations and customer satisfaction. Expectations, understanding what your customers want from you, is the driver to fulfilling it. If you don't know what they want, how can you offer it? Right? I mean, it's kind of logical. So what we're looking at here is, we're looking at the gap between the expectation score, and the question is, what was your expectation for the brand? And the follow-up question is, what was your satisfaction for the brand? So we're looking at the gap. If it's a big negative gap, that means the brand is failing in delivering customer expectations. And the brands in the red are distinctly below customer expectations. And look at their average CSI, it's 68.3. The smaller the gap is in meeting expectations, the higher the customer satisfaction score is. Exceeding needs, very few companies are doing that, by the way. This is a sample of 2%, I believe, in the index. Look at their score, 84.3, right? So it's very hard to A, understand what customers want of you, and B, deliver on that. So to bring this to light, I'm going to share a story that I was very fortunate to spend a holiday with my daughter last year, where we chose to go to a hotel in Amman called Shangri-La. Anyone know it? Old hotel. So we had no expectations. We thought it would be an old hotel and that's it. And all our desire was is to spend time on the beach and do nothing, right? Be beach bums. But our experience taught us how well they had mapped the customer journey in the hotel at 3 data points. The first of these is when you check into the hotel. Typically, any hotel that you go to, you arrive at the reception, you stand in line, it's your turn, you give them your passport, your credit card, they check you in, you go up to your room. At the Shangri-La, it wasn't like that. We were greeted very warmly at the entrance. We were asked to sit down in a lounge. They took our passport, and that was it. They gave us a towel to wipe the dust off our faces, and then offered us drinks and refreshments and that sort of thing, and then they said, please, tfaddalu, to your room. So it was, wow, this is great. This is a different experience than most hotels. Even the 5-star hotels don't usually do it that way. So that was the first case. This was understanding customer expectations and going one step and exceeding it. The second incident is the beach. In the beach, everyone gets a complimentary ice box. The ice box, besides obviously ice, has cold water, juice, a cool towel so you can put it on your face if you're really overheating, chapstick, and another perk, they had a sleeve, so it was fitted with a cloth sleeve that had pockets, so you could put your iPhone, your earphones, whatever it is, your phone, your Kindle. Again, it was a great way to make the customer very comfortable while they're in the heat. At the same time, they're relieving their staff from running around serving people cold drinks. Again, customer journey, what do they need? How can we make it better? The third of these is the cocktail hour in the evening. The cocktail hour is usually before dinner. It's a dead time usually for guests. They don't know what to do with this dead time before it's time to go to dinner. For the hotel, it's a critical time period where the hotel has to go into the rooms, refresh them, turn down the sheets, make sure there's fresh towels. So this cocktail hour that's complimentary, people are sitting in a beautiful courtyard, there's music, there's live music, they're drinking juice, whatever, they're being offered something to eat, they're enjoying an hour and a half before dinner time, and they're relieving the staff in the hotel so that they can go and clean up the rooms. So again, an opportunity that they've identified to exceed customer expectations and delight their customers. So it's a very important lesson to always ask ourselves, what do the customers want? How can we make it better? So that's the first of the golden nuggets, exceeding expectations. The second is about this idea, this notion of consistency. It's actually it's not rocket science, but we have math that proves that this really does work. So if you'll see, we have 3 bars in this chart. The first is very inconsistent brands. What does that mean? That means their customer satisfaction score in the years that we've been measuring, the 15 years, has been going up and down. One time it's high, one time it's low, one time it's high, one time it's low. So when it's inconsistent, you'll see that they tend to, on average, because this is looking at hundreds of brands, they tend to be lower in customer satisfaction. And as you can see, this is very inconsistent, it's a little bit higher. And then when it's stable, it hits the 80-point threshold, which we said is the customer service level is the level that we want the customer to receive. So it's where the customer is pleased. So an example of inconsistency, and I'm sure you can all relate to examples like this. Everyone likes their favorite restaurant or restaurants. And if you go to one, like my family, we used to go to one that we used to think was great. The setting was great, the food was great, the service was great. We really liked it. But then with time, we'd start experiencing inconsistencies. Maybe they were too slow. Maybe they weren't as friendly. Maybe the food quality changed. It was no longer the same, or the variety, so it wasn't available. So all of these, you give them an excuse the first time, right? You're loyal. If you go to the same restaurant, you're loyal. The first time you'll say, okay, they're having a bad day. The second time you begin to grumble. The third time, 3 strikes and you're out. So at that level you say, okay, khalas, this is no longer going to be a place that I'm going to go to because They're inconsistent. And inconsistency, I'm going to share with you now a slide. I think it's probably the most important in terms of giving you an idea who leads in the sphere in Kuwait. We're looking at the average for a brand across 15 years of data, so their customer satisfaction score. These are the top 10 in Kuwait when it comes to customer satisfaction. Really high scores: Mais Al Ghanem, Boubian, Emirates, Caribou, Qatar Airways, NBK, PF Chang's, American Eagle, McDonald's, and IKEA. What does this suggest? To be this consistent and this high, it means you have made customer experience the focal point of your strategy, right? You have to have that as a leadership team. You have to have the KPIs, the resources, the systems, the empowerment, etc., everything, the standards to deliver upon it. And probably the most important one is letting your team know that that's what you want. You want great service. You train them, you recruit for that, and you reward them for that. So it's a culture that's cohesive around CX. 15 years ago, when you experience bad service, you tell your friends and you'd move on, right? That was it. It was a limited pool of people that would be affected. Today, that's not the case. If you experience bad service today, you tell a few people, you go online, you shout it out, suddenly everyone sees your star rating. And I'm going to share data now on the importance of reviews and the importance of star ratings based on a US study that was done that I think is very comparable for Kuwait, because Kuwait is a very digitally advanced culture. We are early adopters of technology for so many reasons, and so I think the same very easily applies to Kuwait. So let's take a look at what the data says. It says that consumers rely heavily on online reviews 75% of the time, always or regularly. So, and even if you think about your own habits, before you make a purchase decision or decide where to go, you usually do look online for the reviews. The other metric is that 50% of consumers rely on online reviews just as much as they do for word of mouth. Old days, when I started my career, it was word of mouth. Word of mouth was king. Now it's an equal footing with online reviews. The other component is to do with purchasing decisions. So the data says that if a brand has less than 3 stars, people will not deal with it. 71% of consumers will not deal with a brand that has less than 3 stars. And also 88% of consumers prefer it when a brand responds to online reviews. Most brands tend to ignore online reviews, and we're telling you there's a great opportunity to strengthen your reputation and image with consumers by responding to their feedback, whether it's thanking them or apologizing for a problem and trying to address it. The power of customer voices has never been stronger, because now it's amplified with a digital presence and online review abilities. And so we'd like you to leverage the data that we run so that you can benefit from that. We have designed an engagement dashboard. Last year it was introduced that's nearly live, and what it does is it tracks 24/7, 365 days a year, the data. It has 20 key metrics. It's totally consumer-driven based on only verified reviews. We get into a lot of trouble with some of the brands because they tell us, our data is too small, we're inviting feedback, but you're not accepting the feedback. The feedback that isn't accepted by us is flagged by the system as unauthentic data. So we need to make sure that what we're reporting is authentic. And I think instead of me talking, I'd like to share a very brief video about the dashboard that shows you some of the capabilities in the dashboard. I'd like to end with another quote. Carl Sagan is a cosmologist, and I'm not really sure what the difference is between a cosmologist and astronomer, but he says that extinction is the rule, survival is the exception. And since we've been running the index, we've seen a lot of brands fluctuating in and out of the index, especially in the restaurants category and in closed category. There's a lot that have closed. But we've also had a couple of brands that were winners in the index close down. Wataniya Airways in 2010 was the #1 airline, and they went bankrupt. Safeco, same story. For 3 years they were running, they were leading in their category, and for various reasons, probably one of them is the ability to serve customers in a way that delighted them, they weren't able to maintain it. We hope that you will take this as a way to focus on the two things that I talked about, understanding expectations and being consistent so that you continue to thrive and do not become the extinction in the rule. We now come to the panel, and I'm really pleased to be, I'm going to invite them in a second, but before I do, I just wanted to share one thing that we will be also discussing in the panel. We ran a survey among executives in February and March. We asked executives a number of questions. There were 10 questions. We had 250 on our mailing list, and 62 responded to our survey. And the survey was asking them to rate from 1 to 10 on 10 questions to do with CX. CX means customer experience, just to make it brief. So you'll see in this chart, in the survey, the highest scores were given to 92.5, 92.6 on everyone understanding that customer experience was very important, and strategically it's what they should be focusing on. This is a little bit of a biased sample, don't forget, because these are executives that are already familiar with CX and are favorable to it. But I want to, and generally, all the questions, the score is 88.37. Not too surprising, given that we've seen that the national score is quite high and quite healthy, right? So it does suggest that. But I just want to draw your attention to the lowest scoring 3. First of all, a third-party benchmark, so external data about the situation of a sector and its customer satisfaction. That brands can do a little bit more focus on that. The other one is innovation. So it's one thing to say, I want to excel. Another thing is to actually innovate. If you're interested in the full report, I think there's a QR code on the tables that directs you to it's like 10 pages long of insights from the report, because the respondents also left comments on what should be improved. So we thought we'd share this with you before we invite our panelists.